Political philosopher H.L. Mencken once said that democracy is the idea that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it, good and hard. But Americans in the 1930s weren't so complacent as today's nation of sheep. The 1930s tax revolts were so heated that the mayor of Chicago once threatened to shut off water to the city as a response to the protesters. Joining me now for the backstory on the spirit of American tax resistance is Independent Institute fellow David Beito. David, welcome to Freedom Watch.
Thank you. I'm also a professor at University of Alabama.
Oh, welcome. I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you. Get a plug in for my institution.
Good for you and good for the University of Alabama. What happened in the 30s when Roosevelt began cranking up the tax rates after he had confiscated gold and all the other things we know he did in deference to his views that the economy would be better if it were planned by bureaucrats in Washington rather than subject to the free choices of consumers and investors throughout the country? What were the tax protesters protesting?
Well, this is actually before Roosevelt. What you had was real estate values plummeted, unemployment went up, the assessments stayed high. And so at the local level, this is almost wholly focused on property taxes. There was a massive tax revolt throughout the country. By 1933, there were something like 3,000 taxpayers' organizations. There was a tax strike in Chicago that was headline news for 2 years. There was massive tax delinquency. There were tax limitation laws passed. So this really hit even before Roosevelt came in.
And do these tax revolts ever work? I mean, I remember reading about the whiskey rebellion, the farmers that didn't want to pay tax on whiskey. This is the earliest days of the Republic. Alexander Hamilton got on a horse and arrested them, and some of them were almost executed. Doesn't the government always get its way, no matter how virulent or compelling the tax protesters may be?
Well, sadly, that's probably true. In the 1930s, you could say that the tax rebels had some short-term victories, and there was some property tax relief, but a lot of that ended up just disappearing in the next few years, and some of that relief came because of the repeal of prohibition and the ability to levy liquor taxes, but it was largely canceled out by the end of the decade.
You know, I have often argued that the 16th Amendment shouldn't exist, that it's contrary to the very spirit of the Constitution, which was that there would be no personal relationship between the federal government and individuals. And I've argued that taxation is theft. Putting aside the virtues or lack of them in my argument, how did the government fund itself and its activities before an income tax, before it reached down and touched every individual American or nearly personally?
Well, it relied on tariffs, on land sales, but the federal government is Lilliputian at the turn of the century by today's standards. I mean, government at all levels was well under the 10% of the gross domestic product.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me that the more money the government got in taxation and tax collections, the bigger it got and the more it decided to do with that money?
It went together like hand in glove. After the beginning of the income tax, we see an explosive growth of government in the next few decades.
David Beito from the University of Alabama, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.